Okay, so we are on the first practice project of the course. It's gonna be real simple, just we're gonna get used to work with Vue, and this is what we're gonna do. This tiny app, who pays the bill? So this is of course the first screen, and then of course if we what we need to do, we need to add names. So in this case, I don't know, I will add Steve. And if I add it, we're gonna add this to a list. If I add something, we have some validation. If we have Francis, and basically we just add names. As soon as we have two names, we're gonna let the button show, and of course we're gonna check who's the loser, and it's gonna perform a math operation. It's gonna get a random name from these three users, and the loser is Francis. We're gonna go to the next screen, and if we want to start again, we just can start again, right? Really simple. Okay, so as a resource, I've added the template of what we're going to be using. We're going to be doing pretty much, the HTML, but we're going to be using the index HTML. What we are not going to do is going to be the CSS. We are not going to do CSS because this is a JavaScript course, of course. And one thing that you should not do is to use the CSS. I made that CSS in a few minutes. So don't take that CSS as a reference, all right? Okay, so download the template file. I gave you the zip as a resource, and open your IDE with that folder, and let's get started. Main.js, we're going to do all Vue.js logic right here, and then of course you get the Vue, the Vue.js. On the index, we don't have much. We have the fonts. We're going to use Roboto and Anton. And then, a link to the CSS, a link to the Vue.js, and the empty app. And then, of course, we make a reference to the main.js. We're going to do this in a couple minutes. All right, so let's begin. So first, of course, we need to put everything inside app because this is where Vue.js is going to kick in. So we have two different directories. And let me just go here to my files. Let me just try to open the HTML. This is the final one. I'm going to open the one I'm using right now. So for this, I forgot to do it. So 1 second, almost done. So there we go. Okay, so I have the file open. So of course it's empty. So if we check the final one, after we add a couple names, we have this screen, of course. And when we are ready to check the loser, we're going to go to a second screen. So we're going to get two containers. We need to create two different containers. All right. So one is going to be for the names, and the other one is going to be for the results. So I'm going to create a div, the first div, and this one will have an ID of names, of course. I'm going to call it names. And of course, since we're going to be using some styles, I'm going to add a container class. All right. And then we can have a different one, a different div, which is going to be the results container. So this one is going to be ID, of course, and we're going to name it results. Results, plural. Actually, singular, result, because it's just a single result. Then the class, and we use the same container class. All right. Now the first one needs a title, who pays the bill. So H1, and we're going to give it a title. Who pays the bill? All right. And of course, then we have the result, and on the results, we don't really have a title. So I'm gonna wrap everything on a different container. So I'm gonna add a class of result and then container. Okay. And then of course, we will get the H1 saying the loser is. All right. So of course, if I reload this, everything else is on the same place. We have one container on top of the other one. All right. And this is actually correct. Now let's go to the JS and start this, because whenever the application starts, if we don't have results, this one should be hidden and this one should be visible. And once we have all the names and we want to generate a result, then this one will be hidden and this one will be visible. All right. So let's go to the main.js and start all the logic to hide the first component. So the first thing would be to start a new view. Right? Okay, so we're going to say new view, open and close, and we pass the object. We need to pass the element, and the element, of course, is going to be app. All right. Then we need some data. So open and close, and the data. Now, I'm going to create a variable that it's going to be decide if the first one should show and the second one should hide or vice versa. So I'm going to call this property state. So if it's true, it means that the first container, the first screen, the one with the names, should be should show. If it's false, it's going to hide the first and show the second one. Very simple, just a boolean. All right, so I'm going to save it. And this is actually the only thing we need for now. So how can we hide the elements? So we can use a simple if. So I'm going to say if, and if state it's true, this one is going to show, and the other one should be hidden. So on this one, we could use a else, but I'm going to use a if. So if state it's not true, and you can totally do this, that's why I'm doing it, it's actually going to work. It's just two different if statements. If I reload the application, we get the first one, and the second one is hidden. But of course, we need to do a lot of things before we reach that section. Okay. So if we check the final one, let me start again. The next thing will be creating the input and adding the names. All right. So I'm going to go right below the H1, and I'm going to create a container for this one. And I'm going to call this one input container. Input container. You should name the same classes as me, of course, because if not, the styles are not going to kick in. So we need to add an input. So input, and then the type is going to be text, right? And open and close, right? Then we need a button. So I'm going to add a button, open and close, and this one is going to be add, right? Add. Of course, we're going to be adding a couple more things in a minute. So if I reload the application, we get the input and the add. Everything, of course, is faster because the CSS is already done. In real life, you need to do the CSS, and this, of course, takes much more time. But again, this is not a CSS course. All right, so what do we need to do now? What we need to do first is to, connect this to the Vue instance so we can store a name, or we can at least create a variable or a place where we're going to be storing the name. All right. So we do that using vModel, remember? Two-way binding. So I'm going to call this input name. This is the name of the, the property. So we don't have it. I'm going to go right here and say that input name, it's equal to nothing. When the application starts, input name, it's empty. All right. Okay. Then whenever we want to add something to the screen, we want to click the add, and we will be adding the name to a list. All right. So for this one, we are going to need to add an onClick, right? Okay. So add, if we remember, we're going to use the add and then the click. So the function, it's add name to list. On this one, you can, of course, choose whatever name you wish. So I'm going to copy the name of the function, and I'm going to go back to the, JS. We don't have this method, so I'm going to be adding it. Method, methods, open and close. So add name to list and open and close. This is the first function. All right. So the thing is that, and if I go to the final one, if I try to add a name, we need to validate this because maybe the entry is empty. And of course, if it's empty, we don't want to add an empty space, an empty user. So we kind of need to create some kind of validation. So I'm going to go right here at the bottom and create a different function called validate, open and close. Now this validate will take the value we are entering on the actual input, this value, and it's going to check if it's empty or not. So I'm going to say value. This is the argument that it's going to be receiving. So, okay. So first, before we can add anything to a list, we need a place where, we're going to be putting the list. So I'm going to put comma, and I'm going to say names. And of course, this starts as an empty array, right? Then when we have the name, if it's valid, we're going to push elements to the array. All right. First, we need to go through the validate. If the input, if the user enters an empty space and clicks on add, we want to check if the, the field it's empty or not. So we can do this with a simple if else. So if the element, the input, it's not empty, then we're going to push to the list. If not, we're going to show an error. We don't have the place where we can put errors. We will get it in a minute. So first, I'm going to call this function, this method, this validate. So if this one is true, or because it's valid, then we're going to move forward. And where do we have the the value of what the user is entering? Since we are using vModel, everything is on input name. So if we make a reference to this dot input name, is gonna check the if it's valid or not. Of course, we're gonna add the function right here. All right. So I'm gonna do just a simple console log. It's valid, and I'm gonna go right here and say not valid. All right. So let's add the validation right here. So I'm gonna say if open and close, and then we're gonna do an else. Real simple. So if the value is empty, then we want to return true. If not, we're gonna return false. So if the value is different than an empty space, we return true. All right. If not, it will return false, and it will go to this scenario. Now let's let's give it a try. Gonna reload the application and open the console. If I go to the console, there we go. I'm gonna add Steve and click on add, and we get it's valid. If I delete this and click on add, we get it's valid. So of course there is a mistake right here. So let me just double check value. Oh, of course, return false. Sorry for that. Let's try again. Click on add, and we get not valid. All right, so it works. Okay. So what we need to do now is to grab the name if it's valid and push it to the list of names. So we're gonna say this dot names dot push, and we're gonna push whatever name is that we are getting, which is this input.name. Then the next thing is gonna be clearing this space, because if it's we added the name already, we need to clear this. All right. So this dot, I'm gonna enter input name, and I'm gonna say that now it's equal to nothing. Now, if we have an error, we need to let the application know that we have errors. So I'm going to create a place where we can decide if we want to show an error or not. So we're going to say show error, and this one starts at false. But if we do have an error, we're going to say this dot show error, and it's equal to true, because we want to show the error. We don't have the place on the HTML with the error. We're going to create it in a second. Now, of course, if everything is okay and we are able to update the name, if we had the error from before, we need to clear it out. So this dot show error, and we just change it to false. All right. So everything should be working correctly. So let's say I'm going to add Steve, and okay, we are removing this. Now, of course, we don't have a place where we can check the list of names. But that's okay. Don't worry. We're gonna see it in a couple minutes. First, I would like to show to create a place where we can show or display the error. So I'm gonna do this below the input container. I'm gonna create a div. I'm gonna create a class of, and then error, and then label. Now we only want to show the error label if we have an error. Do you know how to do it? If you know, just try to do it yourself. We do pretty much the same thing we did right here with the bif, and then we say show, and let me just copy the name just to avoid mistakes. If we do have an error, it's gonna say you must enter a name. All right, so I'm gonna reload the application, and if I do Steve, we get it, and if I add it, we get the validation. And if I add Ron, for example, I add it, and everything it's cleared. So far, so good. So now what we need to do, and we're gonna go to the next one, we're gonna start showing the names at the bottom. For example, if I add Steve, and this is the final one, okay? If I add Steve or Ron, we're gonna show this, and then we're gonna display the button where we can go to the next instance. All right, so let's go to the next one and do this.